to just sort of take your shot. Because I can tell you right now, as a 16-year-old who bought my first comic book and started to wish that I could maybe teach myself to get in the comic book, I had no idea where that path would go, right? And so this is the thing that I try to sort of tell, like, especially young kids who want to break into bit, like, just take your shot, because who knows, when opportunity knocks and you never know, and you open up the door, you never know who's on the other side of that door, right? And sometimes you're going, wow, you want to do what? Yeah, cool, let's go. So, and you saw a picture there earlier. I get to do a panel. I'm gonna be the moderator with Frank Miller. If you guys are gonna come out to that panel, it's supposed to be a Daredevil one. But I'm gonna guess, because I know Frank and I know me, we go back many decades. We're gonna veer off course, right? Because we've got too many war stories to tell you guys, right? That have nothing to do with Daredevil. And I'm sure once we get going, we'll be like, oh yeah, let's get back to Daredevil. And we'll be sitting there. So I look forward to seeing Frank up on stage having a good time. But I was 16, if we look at the next one here, so this is a couple, like this is some of my early stuff that I was doing when I was in my basement, literally my basement with my dad, right? There's my high school photo down there. The baseball photo down here, the guy in the leather jacket, that's my dad, right? The original Todd father. Right, he's there looking like look at the coach back then. This is like in the 70s, right? Coaches were badass, right? Not gonna dressed and looking like you were gonna wear leather. We're gonna look like one of those drama TV shows that used to have movie of the weeks, right? I'm the guy that's in the left with the long hair and the Goldilocks there. That was when I moved back to Calgary when I invented Spawn in my basement, but. You go, cool, I thought I was going to be a baseball player, you know, that was my goal, but I go, I'll teach myself how to do a little bit of drawing. So you push the buttons, I'll catch up to you as you push the buttons here. These are samples. This is what I used to do. I don't know if you can read the words on there, like bodies and bodies. I've said it before, I would go weeks and weeks and weeks, and all I would do is certain parts of the anatomy. So these pages were ones, I do little drawings. Most of these, the reason I cut them out and pasted them, because I was doing them at school. You know, I was like doodling and getting D's, well, because I wasn't paying attention to anything, right? So I just was doodling in the corner, and then I go home and I cut up all my pages I was supposed to be doing homework, and then I put them in my books, and I try to get better and better and better and better, and we keep going. So, during that time, look, we're all like to be closet collectors, right? And here's why they call it a closet collector. Because my girlfriend right here that you see, it's like you don't want to be the person who goes, yeah, to the comic book. So what you do is I have a shelf and I put it in my closet, right? You guys have one of these, and then you close it, right? And you close it so when she comes in, she thinks you're a self-respecting person. Right? But I remember the one time she opened the door and she saw them, the stack of the comic books, and they were all organized and numbered and had labels on them and stuff. And she's going, what's that? And look, there's only one answer at that point. They're my brothers. Right? So, but eventually she found out they were actually mine, and she still put up with it. But here's the upside of all of it. She sort of enjoyed my flaws. Anyways, at that point I was about 17, she was 13, and I am more than ecstatic to say that we have been together for 47 years, right? So, yeah. Not to get mushy, but I know people have had long lives and stuff. They go, Todd, man, what's this? I don't know if there's any secret. Here's what I will tell you, though, with all honesty. Loving that woman for 47 years has been as easy as breathing, right? It's been that easy. What are you talking about? I wish, knowing what I've had, I wish a lot of things on many people, and having a good relationship with somebody that you love for decades, Man, I wish I could sprinkle that on everybody across the world, because it's good. It's good chicken noodle for the soul. Her name is Wanda, right? A name that you may be familiar with in the comic books, right? Because the whole concept of the Spawn character I created when I was a kid came from that one, which is, let me just tell you sort of the core of the idea of Spawn, and it's basic. I don't care who you are, what your religion is, what your political beliefs are. I don't care any of that. I believe that we all have somebody that we love dearly. And if you woke up today and for whatever reason got in a fight with that person, and then as you're walking out the door, you said, screw you, and you slammed the door, and you got in your car, and you're heading to work wherever you're going, and then you got broadsided by a bus, and you were killed. You have to live with the fact that the last thing you said to the person that you love the most is screw you, right? That's, to me, would be crushing. I think everybody, in a blink of an eye, if somebody said, you can go back and say I love you, would take the deal. And only after you take it, because we're emotional animals, we would take the deal and then would go, who said that? And that sort of is the idea of Spawn, of he let an emotional moment get the better of him, and he forgot to read the fine print when he made the deal with the devil. And now he's been dealing with the repercussions of it ever since, right? But it came from a good spot. He just wanted to go back to his Wanda, right? I got my Wanda. I know I wouldn't want to leave this earth with a negative sort of voice to her, so that's it. So what I did was I created all these characters. Like I said, Spawn was, I did about 20, 25 of them. I was drawing like Superman, Batman, Spider-Man, all the Marvel DC stuff. But I also was creating my own character, Spawn being one of them. And then over time, as I taught myself to draw, I also went to college and I would send off samples. And some of you have heard hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of samples. I just sent them over and over and over and over. And so a couple of these are actually the envelopes, because I kept almost all of the rejection letters I had. They were motivation for me, right? I've said before, I used to have a whole bag of rejection letters, and I'd go to shows and people would come up to me, some young aspiring artist, and they go, man, I tried to break in, and I sent my samples, and I sent it to a couple people, and they said, it's not good, I don't know what to do. And I pull out that bag and I pour that stack of rejections, and I go, every one of those said stop. And I still went, and here I am, and you wanted my autograph, right? I'm telling you, you just go until you find one yes. Forget the no's. Keep going until you get one yes. That's all you need. And once you get the one yes, you're golden, right? So I kept track on those charts of who I sent it to and what they were, and eventually I got that first phone call, right? I got the first phone call from somebody at Marvel, and what had happened was I had sent some samples to Ann Nocente, who was the editor at the X-Men. She gave it to Archie Goodwin, and he was the editor at this thing called the Epic Illustrated line, who gave it to Steve Englehart, who was doing a book called Coyote, and Steve Englehart needed 10 pages in the back of his Coyote book, and it just went bam, 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 bam. I sent it to X-Men. I was never going to take over John Byrne's job, right? But it's like, I'll send it to everybody. I literally was sending it to everybody. But it came up and around, and then Steve Englehart phoned and said, hey, Todd, I've got 10 pages. You want to do this character called Scorpio Rose, right? This is like you remember these moments when the phone comes and you're going, man, I got my first job. This is it. You hit it. And I did the designs as you saw on there. Oddly, Coyote number 12, I believe, I got it right. Coyote 12 was the very first thing I ever drew in my life professionally. They liked what I drew, and they said, hey, you want to do this other story called Slash? Somebody drew it. We don't like it. You want to redraw it? And here's the script. And I'm like, yeah, sure, right? Like, you're hungry. You'll do it. And then they, even though I drew Slash second, they published it first, right? So to you, my first work is Slash in Coyote number 11. For me, though, I like that Scorpio Rose story I did in 12 was the first stuff. anybody ever gave me a paycheck for. And I don't know, you're not going to be able to read it. A couple things are interesting here because it says down at the bottom, and I don't know why they did it, I don't know. It says introducing in big letters, they got my name, right? And I was like, oh man, Mom's going to be so proud, right? And they give you like 10, 15 copies of it. And I remember I get my free copies, and I was at college at that point. I'm still trying to finish up college. And I went up and down the street, and I was so proud. I was knocking on the doors. Hi, my name's Todd. You don't know nothing about me, and I'm sure you don't like comic books, but this is mine, right? And then I went to the next house, and I was just handing out like flyers, essentially, these comic books that are there. The thing that's intriguing to me, if you sort of squint and you can see it, the letterer of that book is a gentleman by the name of Tom Orzechowski. And Tom Orzechowski, for those of you who haven't been paying attention, is the gentleman who has lettered all 360 issues of Spawn, right? So when fast forward, when I started the Spawn comic book, I said to myself, oh, it's my book, I get to do what I want. Who's the best letterer in the business? And to me, Tom Orzechowski, who's doing the X-Men, was the best letterer in the business by far. So I went, hey Tom, you want to letter my book? And by the way, man, you lettered my very first job or whatever. And he went, yeah. So as many pages and as many scripts as I've written with Spawn, the person who's done more pages than anybody else on Spawn is Tom Orzechowski, because he has literally touched every page of that book since its inception in 1992. So at some point we'll have one. But doing that book, let me tell you, that book Coyote only lasted for 4 months, and then they canceled the book. And all of a sudden I was out of work, right? And so now all of a sudden I'm out of work, and I'm going, oh man, I don't know if I'm going to get in. So I took those charts that you saw up there, and I resent all my stuff to all those same people, because I kept the chart. Here's who I sent it to, who responded. And even though they said no, the people who wrote back were very kind in their rejections. The people who didn't care just took your samples and threw it in the garbage and never responded. The people who took time to write always gave you constructive criticism. And in hindsight, they were right. I wasn't ready. So all those no's were actually accurate. Not like, oh, you showed that top. They were actually accurate. I wasn't good enough. But they kept telling me, you should prove this, and prove this, and prove this, and prove this. And I eventually got better to the point that I got the job in Coyote. But 4 months later, they canceled the book for low sales. And all of a sudden, I'm like, oh man. And then these moments in life that you have no control over that just have to come your way. And it's just called dumb luck. And here's my dumb luck. And dumb luck sometimes, ladies and gentlemen, comes at the expense of somebody else's heartbreak, right? So I go, oh my gosh, I want to stay in the comic books. I don't have a job anymore. And I send it off to everybody. Here's the one thing I was able to do different. Before, I was saying, hey, I'm an amateur. I'm trying to break in. But now, after 4 months, I didn't get really much better. In all honesty, the work wasn't any better than it was 4 months earlier. But I got to say in my letters, I work for Marvel Comics. I'm a professional, right? And that sentence puts you in a different pile. There's the people who want to break in, and then there's the pros. And I was essentially a pro, so I got into the short pile. I get a phone call from a guy named Roy Thomas, and Roy Thomas then says, hey Todd, I've got a book, Infinity Incorporated. I need somebody to take over. I need somebody to take over for 2 months. You want to do it? I was only doing 10 pages, right? I was getting paid. I was doing 10 pages, getting paid $60 a page. I thought I was a king. I was living like a king on $600. And he says, I've got a book. It's only 2 months, 25 pages, and I can only pay you $75. Woo! I was a king at 600. Like, what are you talking about? Once I got that job, I'm telling you, the first thing I did, I went out and bought a ring, and I bent my knee, and my wife and I got married, right? Because I finally had money to basically support my wife. And so that was it. Why did he need somebody on that book? Because the person who had done all the issues prior to that died. A guy by the name of Don Newton, you should look him up. He was a brilliant artist. He was a guy, I collected a bunch of his stuff. Don Newton did some of the best anatomy I ever saw. And then I saw why, because all of a sudden I saw a picture of him. This dude was buff. He looked good. I mean, he literally looked like what he was drawing, right? And he was, I saw an article of him in Men's Magazine or one of these men's work, like that's how good he was. He was in the Men's Magazine for muscle. But he was a health nut, as you can imagine, because he just worked out. And he decided that it would be healthy for him to drink unpasteurized milk. And so he drank unpasteurized milk, didn't know he had an allergic reaction to it. By the time they get him from the ambulance to the hospital, he's dead on arrival, right? Now, heartbreak for that family, left an opening for somebody else, right? And that happened to be me. And I still, to this day, I have to tell you, I wonder, what if he never drank that milk? Would I have ever gotten my foot back in? Or if I did, it would have been a completely different path. That's that sliding door thing that you just go, oh man, my real big break in comic books to get a monthly comic book came at the expense of Don not being here any longer. But I'll have control of it. All I get to do is go, I better make the most of it. So if you bought the first issue of Infinity Incorporated, it says, guest penciler Todd McFarlane. The very next issue says, penciler in residence, which meant you were going to be the permanent artist. Why? Because I was only supposed to take over for 2 issues, and somebody else was supposed to take over, and they decided not to do it. And so Roy phones me up after doing the first issue going, you want to just stay? Yeah, what are you talking about? What are you talking about? I want to get into this business. You got a gig for me. This is good money. I'm in. And that was the thing that cemented the piece of my career that said he could meet a deadline, right? And I've told people before, you don't have to really be that good. If you can meet a deadline in a deadline-driven business, you're gold. If you can draw like Michelangelo, but you're slow, you're no good, or you're going to be a cover artist, right? That's it, right? They need pages on a monthly basis over and over and over and over and over. And if you can show them you can do that and you're mediocre, you can get a job. And if you can do that and you're good, whew, fine. They'll take that all day long. So Infinity Incorporated was the thing that showed everybody, the other editors, both at Marvel and DC, that guy, that new kid named Todd McFarlane could do deadlines, right? So that ends up leading to, I end up walking away from DC because I was trying to figure out whether I'd have any job other than Roy Thomas, because he would have kept me busy till I was 70 years old. But I went, no, I gotta go see if there's anybody else that likes me other than Roy Thomas. So I went over to Marvel, because that's how it worked. If you were at Marvel, you went to DC. If you were at DC, you went over to Marvel. You just sort of zigzag back and forth for the most part. And I went over there, and they said, I remember talking to one editor, and they said, okay, we'll give you a job. It wasn't Hulk at that point. We'll give you a job, we'll do a test, but you can't do what they call, you can't do the giant dice style that you have. And the reason was, because I had this funky style on Infinity Incorporated, because I knew my drawing wasn't very good, but I was going to college for a graphic design degree, and so I put all this graphic design stuff. And one of the pages, I did a big giant dice, and then I put panels in it. And I guess the editor must have looked at that book, because they went, we're going to give you this story, and we need you to basically do standard storytelling. You can't do that giant dice style, Todd. And I'm like, whatever, like I'm good. And let me tell you, ladies and gentlemen, what they were asking me to do was basically say, Todd, we need you to run at half speed. Because the designing and the being creative with the pages took a lot more work to figure it out. And taking the page and cutting it into 6 panels and then drawing within this blend layout, that was easy, right? So, but because I also knew it was a deadline one, they said, we'll give you this job. It was called Spitfire. Sadly, though, Todd, you only have 12 days to do it. You normally have 30 days. So it's a month. You Incredible Hulk, that to my mom and dad, I had made it. Why? Because it was something they had heard. right? They're like, oh man, you've really made it. No, I've been making it for the last 3 years, Dad. You just don't know those characters. But they were able to then go to the neighbors and go, my son draws the Hulk. Right? And so to them, it was like, oh, and the neighbors knew who the Hulk was. Like, oh man, your son must be good. Right? So again, it's always weird that the promotion that you get is like with characters, it was never cash. It was always characters that they would promote you on. I jump on the Hulk. I bet you, I'd have to look, but I don't know how many issues I did of it, but I swear it seemed like I got a different inker every issue, right? It was, and so the one thing that was happening in my career at this point was that I was getting different inkers all the time, and everybody, and I had created this newer style because I was like a big fan of like the X-Men with John Byrne and Terry Austin who was inking it. And I called it my sort of dot dash style. And it was sort of this new modern look that sort of was simulating what Terry Austin was doing on the X-Men. And they were giving me what like classic brush inkers. And it's like, I never thought that it sort of meshed, but what are you gonna do? You just going along for the ride and they're giving it to you. But I was also getting faster. Remember I said I could do a book in 8 days? I was getting faster and faster and faster and faster. And I got to the point where I could do 2 books. I could do 2 books.
Wow.
And so very few people could get to that point. But I was going, I can do 2 books. So I was looking for a second book. So I ended up doing the Hulk, and then the editor of the Hulk, a guy named Bob Harris, said, hey, we got an opening on G.I. Joe. Do you want to jump on G.I. Joe? I'm like, yeah, sure, G.I. Joe, that's a book selling. Now, let me just tell you sort of a weird thing about G.I. Joe. I'm Canadian, right? So I was living in Vancouver, British Columbia, and I was acutely aware that as I was living in Canada, I was drawing a book whose title was G.I. Joe, A Real American Hero. I go, I hope they don't invent a thing called the internet, because this is going to all get blown up, right? So I was drawing it, I drew 1 month of it. Larry Hama was the writer. Him and I were basically oil and vinegar. We didn't see the world the exact same way, right? So I'm sure you should get his perspective on it, whatever. So we just clashed and clashed and clashed. And then I remember I was sitting, again, there were moments that are burnt in all of our lives that you just have clarity. I'm sitting at my table and I'm drawing and the phone rings and they said, Todd, we gotta fire you off G.I. Joe. It's just not gonna work. And I'm like, on some level, I was kind of relieved because it was such a fight, that first issue, that it was like, yeah, okay, fine. It was like a bit of a bummer, but like, okay. So again, I'd never been fired, and you're getting fired. And I remember, oddly, that I looked at the clock, because it was like, well, this is new, I'm fired. And I looked, it was 12:07, right? And I was like, oh man, okay, well, whatever. At 12:14, 7 minutes later, ring, phone rings. Somebody on the other end from DC Comics said, Dick Giordano. He said, Todd, remember when you were doing Infinity Incorporated and you left? Remember you said, the last thing you said to me? Yeah, I'll come back, but only for Batman. Right? I went, yeah. Alan Davis, we've got this book, Batman Year 2. Remember Frank Miller did Batman Year 1, right? Woo! And The Dark Knight, woo! And then they're going, we're doing Batman Year 2. And Alan Davis, who did the first issue, isn't doing the rest. I to this day, I don't know why. But we got an opening, you want to finish Batman Year 2. So I was unemployed for 7 minutes. And I went from G.I. Joe that was like pulling hair to drawing Batman. And I'm like, oh, man. So he's like, do you think you have time in your schedule? And I'm like, let me check. By coincidence, no, I didn't tell him I just got fired because he might not have given me the job. But I got to do Batman for the first time, right? And I'm like, oh, cool. Get to have some fun in doing it. Now, the third issue I did, which was part 4 of 4, I sort of hit this other moment where I got my samples and the inker on the book who had done some other stuff on me, whatever, I just couldn't take it anymore. these sort of old school way of inking. This new, I couldn't do it anymore. So I usually don't ever do this, and I hate myself, but I just go, I can't. So I phoned up the editor, Denny O'Neill, and I go, Denny, Todd. He goes, hey Todd, how you doing? I go, good. I just got to say something. I hate it, but I'm going to say it. I have to ink this last issue. I have never inked. I don't know how to ink. I don't even know what that means, but I fucking can't take this anymore. And unfortunately, Denny had already been put in a lurch by Alan Davis quitting, right? And so Alan Davis quit, and he goes, oh man, I'm going to have another guy quit. I'm going to have 3 artists on 4 books. And so he sort of had his back up against the wall, so he had no choice but to say yes, right? And so the 4th part is the first book I ever inked. And then at that point, and it was terrible. I didn't even know what the tools were. The tool I used, I never used it ever again. But what ended up happening was, because I inked that, I was able to go back to the Hulk and go to Bob Harris and say, well, they're letting me ink. Why can't I ink the Hulk? And it was like, yeah, okay, you can ink the Hulk. And again, it wasn't very good either, but now I'm doing 2 books, cool, and I'm inking. I'm like, oh yeah, okay, so again, you sort of elevate up a little bit, but Batman Year 2 goes away, because there's only 3 issues, and now I'm fast enough to do 2 books, I gotta pick up another book. And then that was the one where everybody, all the other editors were coming up to me saying, oh Todd, you're looking for another book? Yeah, cool, okay, cool, we got this book, and this book, but whatever you do, don't go into the Spider-Man office. It's a shambles, right? And so I just went, Spider-Man office, now let me just tell you my personality, right? And my mom and dad would back this up, and a lot of principles that I dealt with, right? You don't ever tell me I can't do something, right? So this is it's like, again, when you're a kid and your dad says, okay, you got a curfew, come home at 11. It was always 11:08, right? Never 11. I just wanted to see how far I could push mom and dad before they actually got mad. And I go, if they didn't get mad at 11:08, next time it was 11:15, right? You just keep going till you get cuffed, right? And then you go, oh, that's the time I got to be home. So they said, don't go in the Spider-Man office. I did, right? So I went, phew, how bad can it be? And I went there, and it was in flux. The artists were sort of coming and going, and the sales were down. I think Amazing Spider-Man was at number 21 at that point in their sales. 21, can you imagine Spider-Man being the 21st best-selling book at that point? And they basically said out loud, just like, hey, we're looking for people to come on board and stay on it and do whatever. We got to get sales up, do whatever, right? Now remember the piece that I took was do whatever, right? I glommed onto that. Now, some of the stuff you see here, the drawing that is, go back. The drawing that's at the top left, I did that when I was 16. That's the first Spider-Man I ever drew. That's my 16-year-old Spider-Man. A couple years later, I started training myself to be a little bit better. The one next to it is, okay, here's Spider-Man. I'm still not a pro. This is when I'm sending off all my samples. And then the one down below is just me doing some sketching, and I'm getting a little bit better. And then, obviously, the one on the right is a professional piece, right? So, again, I just show that sometimes, and I've done it in books, to say, hey, that's where you can be at when you first begin, but eventually if somebody pays you, you'll get better, and then eventually you're like learning a language. I think art is like learning a language. The more you do it, the more fluent you're going to get at it. It's over and over. So I went into the office, and they said, hey, you want to do a Spider-Man book? And I'm like, yeah, I got an opening. I just dropped Batman. And I thought I was going to get one of the lower books, but they gave me Amazing Spider-Man. And I went, you're going to give me like Amazing Spider-Man? To me, that was like the granddaddy book. I'm like, oh, wow, cool. Except, why is he in that black costume? Right? Like, he was in a black costume. Like, I don't understand what this is about. Now, I was aware of Secret Wars, but I'm like, and this was like, come on, I don't want to draw that, right? So I want to draw Spider-Man. Spider-Man's red and blue. He's red and blue. Come on. I get to finally draw Spider-Man and he's black. That's like doing Batman and polka dots. Like, it's not Batman, right? Like, I want to draw Spider-Man. And so we had this conversation. He goes, okay, if you come on, they really like that costume though, Todd. Like, the people upstairs like the black costume, and it's sort of doing whatever. And I'm like, well, what if we just take that black costume off him and I'll just show you a drawing and we'll just come up with something, and that drawing becomes this character you guys now know as Venom. Right? So, no, I didn't know what we were doing at that point. What are you guys talking about? Shit, if it was that easy and I knew how to do it, I'd have 100 Venoms in my portfolio. So I go, we gotta get it off, so we did it. So I did the drawing, I sent it to them, they approved it. They sent it upstairs, they approved it, and then David McFarlane, who came on to write, then sent me the first plot, and then information I could have used earlier, he says it's Eddie Brock. And I went, pardon? Eddie Brock's human. Have you seen my drawing? Right? And it's approved. If I would have known it was Eddie Brock, I would have designed him differently. I probably would have made him with spikes or something, but I would have made him sort of more like a human. But I just thought, oh, it's an alien costume. He should look like an alien. He should look like a monster. Let's go. But then I go, no, I'm not going to redesign him, because if Bruce Banner can turn into the Hulk, then damn it, Eddie Brock can turn into Venom. So screw it, let's just stay with it, right? And David and I had no idea what we were about to unleash. It was just a character. And so for any of you that have like the Amazing Spider-Man 300 issue, you paid a lot of money for it, you got it graded and whatever else, right? It's kind of expensive for a couple of reasons. It's an anniversary book, 300. It's early in my career, but really one of the big things that drives it, they call it the origin of Venom. Right? And this is like the first full story of Venom, the origin of Venom. I don't call it that issue 300, the origin of Venom. I call it, finally, we get the damn black costume on Peter Parker issue. Because the last page of Spider-Man, Amazing Spider-Man 300 is one, to me, I thought I drew Spider-Man for the very first time. And although I sold a bunch of pages over the years, and I wish I had a bunch of them back, I still have that last page. That last page of Spider-Man 300, where he jumps out and says, a new beginning, woo! And I came out and I'm like, man, I'm finally, in my mind, I'm finally artistically drawing Spider-Man. And you are by yourself in your thoughts. Here's what you need to do, entertain yourself. So I was just drawing stuff to entertain myself. So it was like, man, what would be cool? Right? Oh, if I put him in this pose, and if he does this, and he does that. I don't know if you guys remember, I did stupid stuff, like he's hanging upside down, waiting, like he's doing a stakeout or something like that for some criminal. And he went to the donut place, and he had a donut on each finger. You guys remember the shot? Because I thought, like, if he can crawl walls, isn't his fingers sticky? So if they're all sticky, he can go in. Oh, I got 5 donuts. And then he was just like, which one am I going to eat right now? Right? So this is how I was just trying to entertain myself, to get through all the pages, because every page isn't like cool stuff with the good guy and the bad guy sort of doing their thing. So I just was adding these pieces. It's just that it sort of ruffled the feather of the status quo. Now let me also tell you, I have learned a couple things in my life. I'm in my early 60s now. The great enemy for you young people, the great enemy that you will meet in your life is status quo. People hanging on, corporations, workers, bosses hanging on to yesterday. I don't give a shit about what happened yesterday. I can control it and it's gone. What I can worry about is right this moment and tomorrow. My best day is always now or tomorrow. And yesterday is gone. And to hold on to that, you're never going to evolve. And what's strange about status quo, ladies and gentlemen, is that there's only two constants. There's only two constants in life. Death, it's going to come and get all of us, and change. It's been happening since the dawn of man. Otherwise, we'd still be in caves. We've been changing, and yet we fight change. It is crazy. It is crazy how much we just go, this is how we've always done it. And the people that have made waves are the people who go, well, what about trying another way? Right? Another way. So they took it that me changing Spider-Man, especially the webs, was because somehow I was insulting them. And I was like, what? My job is to sell comic books. You hired me to sell comic books. And at that point, by the time I quit Spider-Man, I was selling more comic books than anybody they employed. And yet, every time I came in, I'm telling you, I've told the story, they just wagged their finger at me, going, you can't draw him like that, you can't draw him like that, you can't draw him like that. And I'm like, why? And it's like, well, you gotta look this certain way. Why? Why? What's the goal? The goal is to sell comic books. You're in the comic book selling business. I sell more comic books than anybody you employ. Why am I the guy we're having the conversation with? Why don't you talk to everybody other than me? Because they're behind me in this race. And eventually they just wore me out, ladies and gentlemen. And again, different personalities, all of you here. Some of you might have lasted 20 years, some of you might have lasted 20 days. I just got to the end of my rope, so I had to quit. And the reason I quit, if you go to the last issue, was because of this page. This was literally the proverbial camel that broke, the straw that broke the camel's back. Spider-Man's fighting against Juggernaut, and I'm like, can't be Juggernaut, he's unstoppable. Except for he's got this little slit opening for his eye, so there's only one opening that you have. Take him in the eye. And I put that drawing. The reason that we have that drawing, I still have that page as is framed. I kept that page because that was the one that got me away from Marvel. This is what's in your comic book, right? Wow. They ended up, they pulled it out. I gave them a splatter effect, whatever. I had some silly conversation. And when they were there over the phone saying, hey, Todd, we got to do this and this and this and this, I just want, okay, guys, I'm going to do a couple of drawings. You guys fix it any way you want. I'm about to have my first child. I'm done. I am done. You've baked me, right? I just can't do this over and over. That is just never good enough for you. And we've been talking together for years. And we were all talking about doing our own comic book. And then we just asked a simple question, well, why don't we do them together? Why don't we do them like everybody's been doing comic books individually for 40 years? Why don't we do a strength in numbers? And then Rob said, hey, what about Jim Valentino? He does some stuff. I'm like, again, the more the merrier. We got 3 of us, there's 4 of us. So I got on the plane, and Rob got on the plane and went to New York to basically tell Marvel we were quitting. And we had 24 hours, like we landed, and the next morning at 8 o'clock we had a meeting to tell them we were quitting. And in that, and here's those breaks, those lucky breaks, in that moment between landing and waiting for the meeting the next morning, I ran into Jim Lee. He happened to be at a convention or at an auction in New York at the same time. I had no idea. And I have the gift of gab, and I'm a good salesman. And I gave him the pitch. He goes, what are you doing here? Well, let me tell you what we're doing. And Jim comes back later, goes, I'm in. And then he goes, how about Will Spataccio? Can he join? Shoot, right? Like, what do you talk about? So we went from 4, 5, 6, and then I'm going back to the hotel. And at the hotel I happen to stay at, again, didn't know it, I run into Mark Silvestri in the lobby. And Mark's there, and he's going, Tom, what are you doing here? It's about 10, 11 o'clock at night. And I go, you got 10 minutes? And I gave him the sales pitch with the closing. You have to give me your answer by 7:30 in the morning because we're going to a meeting, and I need to know whether you're in or out. And he was like, I gotta tell you whether I'm changing my career, like tonight? Yes. And luckily I got the phone call in my room, and he said, I'm in. And so we went into that meeting, and Jim Lee said, I'll come with you. Rob, myself, my wife, and Jim Lee went in, and we broke the news to him. After that, we went over to DC, we broke the news to them. They thought they got all of us. Remember I said earlier, you go back and forth? They thought they hit the mother load. And we just said, no, we've come here to tell you we're not working for you. Which they took as a bit of an insult, because they go, well, why would you come here to say you're not working for us? Especially because Jim Lee has never stepped foot in our office at this point. And it's like, and he was doing the X-Men that was selling more than any comic book. He was the golden boy. And they were like, we're gonna get Rob and Todd and Jim. Like, you should have seen their eyes, ladies and gentlemen. There were 20 of them. Like, when we walked in, there were 20 of them organized. They said, come into the room. And they were like, the mother load. We have hit the mother load of all these guys here. And we said, we're not working for you. and one of the reasons why they go, Todd, why that doesn't make any sense, why would you come here? And again, I just go, my question to them was simple. And I'm way more militant than my other partner. But I just go, you know how, they go, we just came out with a new contract, it's good for the freelancers, it's good for the freelancers, it's good for your life, why are we the bad guys? And I'm like, no, I'm sure you guys did a good job. Just a simple little one question. You know when you did that contract that was going to make the freelancer's life better, did you fucking ask one freelancer what would make their life better? And there was silence in the room. They couldn't even bother to ask any of us in our community what we would need to be better taken care of. They just always knew without asking. And that was the insult to me, of like, you couldn't even take one of us. Not me, not Jim, any of them. There's thousands of us in this industry. You couldn't bother to talk to one of us, right? Like, we can't do this anymore. So we went and started Image Comic Book. This is the picture, that picture before the very first meeting we ever had. And then some of these here, some fun ones here. I have this thing, I go, hey guys, the one down at the bottom right is what I call the dick eye, right? Give me the dick eye, it goes something like this. Right? So they got pretty good at it. The one at the top left is the day that Spawn #1 came out. And I don't know to this day, my wife and I don't understand, like, we were living in Portland and the signing was at Golden Apple in Los Angeles area, and I had our baby, right? Like my wife was teaching, so I don't know if she just went, I gotta go to work. I don't know where you're going, but you've taken care of Cyan, right? And I'm like, I'm going to my signing in LA. I guess she's coming with me. So she was with me the whole time, right? You see her in the page next, right? Because a bunch of people came. There's Jim Lee, there's Rob, a couple people from Hollywood, and I'm holding the baby again, Cyan. I'm like, okay, I guess I'm doing my biggest signing ever in my life, holding the baby in one arm and signing with the other one, and then every now and then pawning the baby off, my daughter Cyan off to somebody else. But if you go to the next couple pages here, we'll go quick here, we've only got a couple minutes. The great pleasure that we had, and part of Image is that we all had to come up with our own book, right? The drawing on the left is the drawing I did when I was 16. Because I did a comic book called Spawn when I was 16. And I was like, oh yeah, I'm gonna do my own comic book, right? And if you look at the logo, see how I got the skull and the A, right? I kept it. When I gave it to Tom Orzechowski, and I said, hey, but as you can see, the drawing that I did and the look of him wasn't much different. He had the cowl, he's got the gloves, and he I mean, there were some changes I made. I added the chains and the spikes and whatever else, but he sort of kind of was about the same. It's still kind of a simplistic design, but one of the great pleasures of jumping into a comic book and having a good life, and you guys have helped give it to me, is that I was able to take this character that I'd had for a while, pull him out, and now not only Spawn #1 come out, but you know, if you go down the line here, I think it's Spawn 100, 150, whatever, 200, whatever. We go all the way till we get to recently issue 300 that sets, well, it's actually 301. 301 ends up setting the record for the longest creator-owned book by any human being on the planet since the dawn of man, right? And so